What would you do if you found your dead father's signature in a document dated after his death? That's what happened to me. I was digitizing Navy records when I saw it. Commander James Mitchell, April 15, 1992. 1 year after his supposed death. Suddenly, everything I believed was a lie. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I am a lieutenant in the United States Navy. For 30 years, I believed my father was dead. The official record said he died in a training accident in 1991, when I was only 5 years old. I grew up with his photograph on our living room wall, a proud naval officer in his dress whites, smiling at a camera he would never see again. My mother never remarried. She kept his memory alive through stories of his bravery, his kindness, and his unwavering dedication to duty. Every year on his birthday, we would visit the Memorial Garden at the naval base in San Diego, where his name was carved into black marble alongside other fallen heroes. I would trace the letters with my small fingers, wondering what kind of man he really was. When I joined the Navy at 18, everyone said I was following in his footsteps. They were right. I wanted to honor him, to make him proud, even though he would never know. I worked hard, earned my commission, and eventually found myself stationed at Naval Base Norfolk in Virginia, working in the Records and Administration Department. It was supposed to be a routine assignment. My job was to digitize old personnel files, transferring decades of paper records into modern computer systems. Day after day, I sat in a cold basement office, scanning documents that smelled of dust and forgotten time. Most of it was boring: transfer orders, performance reviews, medical records. But I loved it. Each file was a small window into someone's life, someone's service. Then, on a rainy Tuesday morning in October, I found the signature that would change everything. I was working through a box of files from 1991, the year my father supposedly died. The box was labeled Naval Intelligence Division, Classified Review, Pending Declassification. Most documents had heavy black redactions, covering names and details that were still considered sensitive. I was used to this. My job was simply to scan what was visible and flag anything that needed further security clearance. Halfway through the box, I pulled out a thin manila folder. The tab read, Operation Silent Harbor, Personnel Transfers. Inside were transfer orders for several officers who had been reassigned from active duty to classified positions. The orders were signed by a commanding officer whose name was partially redacted. But at the bottom of the third page, I saw a signature that made my heart stop. It was clear, unmistakable, and written in blue ink, Commander James Mitchell. My father. I stared at the signature for a long time, my hands trembling. The date next to it read April 15, 1992. More than a year after he was supposed to have died. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It had to be a mistake. Maybe it was a different James Mitchell. The Navy had thousands of officers. It could be anyone. But something deep inside me knew. I knew that signature. I had seen it on old birthday cards my mother kept in a shoebox under her bed. I had seen it on the back of photographs, on letters he had written to her during deployment. This was his handwriting. This was my father. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the document. Then I carefully placed it back in the folder and continued scanning, my mind spinning with questions. If my father had signed a document in 1992, then he had not died in 1991. If he had not died, then where was he? And why had the Navy told us he was dead? I could not focus on work for the rest of the day. I kept thinking about my mother, about the tears she had cried, about the lonely years she had spent raising me alone. I thought about all the times I had stood at his memorial, grieving for a man who might still be alive. The anger started to build inside me, slow and hot like a fire that had been smoldering for years. That evening, I went home and pulled out every document I had about my father. His death certificate, the official Navy letter expressing condolences, the newspaper clipping about the training accident. I read them all again, looking for inconsistencies, for clues I might have missed. The death certificate said he died in a helicopter crash during a night training exercise off the coast of Virginia. His body, the report said, was never recovered due to rough seas and strong currents. Never recovered. No body. No funeral. Just a memorial service and a flag folded into a triangle. I called my mother. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm and familiar. "Sarah, honey, is everything okay?" "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to ask you something about Dad." There was a pause. "What is it? Did you ever see his body? After the accident?" Another pause, longer this time. "No. They told me it was lost at sea." "Why are you asking this now?" I took a deep breath. "I found something at work today. A document. It has Dad's signature on it, dated more than a year after he supposedly died." Silence. Then, in a voice I had never heard her use before, she said, "Come home this weekend. We need to talk." The drive to San Diego took 2 days. I could have flown, but I needed the time to think, to prepare myself for whatever truth was waiting for me. The highway stretched out endlessly before me, and I drove through the night, my mind racing with possibilities. Maybe it was a clerical error. Maybe someone had forged his signature. Maybe I was wrong about everything. But I knew I was not wrong. When I arrived at my childhood home, my mother was waiting on the porch. She looked older than I remembered, her hair more gray, her shoulders slightly bent. She hugged me tightly, and I could feel her trembling. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where we had eaten breakfast together for years, where she had helped me with homework, where we had celebrated birthdays and holidays. She made tea, her hands moving slowly, deliberately, as if she were buying time. Finally, she sat down across from me and folded her hands on the table. "Your father did not die in 1991, she said quietly. The words hung in the air between us. I felt like I had been punched in the chest. Even though I had suspected it, hearing her say it out loud made it real. "What happened?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She took a deep breath. "Your father was a good man, Sarah. One of the best. But he saw something he was not supposed to see. He was working in naval intelligence, investigating procurement contracts for equipment being sent to Allied forces overseas. He discovered that some of the equipment was defective. Navigation systems that did not work properly, communication devices that failed in critical situations. Soldiers were dying because of it." She paused, her eyes filling with tears. "He tried to report it through proper channels, but the people responsible were powerful. They had friends in high places, politicians and contractors who were making millions from these deals. When your father would not stop asking questions, they threatened him. They told him to drop the investigation or face the consequences. And he did not drop it," I said. "No," she said, shaking her head. "He could not. He said that men were dying because of lies and greed, and he could not stand by and let it happen. So they made him disappear." "How?" "They staged the helicopter crash. Made it look like an accident. Your father was given a choice, disappear and stay silent, or die for real. They would have killed him, Sarah. And they would have made it look like an accident, just like they planned. So he agreed. He left us to keep us safe." I felt tears running down my face. "Where is he now?" "I do not know," she said, her voice breaking. "He contacted me once, about a year after he disappeared. He called from a phone booth somewhere, would not tell me where. He said he was alive, that he was safe, and that he loved us both. He said he could never come home, that it would put us in danger. That was the last time I heard his voice." I stared at my mother, trying to process everything she was telling me. My father was alive. He had been alive all these years, living somewhere under a different name, hiding from people who wanted him dead. And my mother had known. She had carried this secret for 30 years, alone. Why did you not tell me? I asked. Because you were a child, she said. And then you joined the Navy, and I was terrified. I thought if you knew the truth, you would go looking for him, and they would find you both. I was trying to protect you. Who are they? I asked. Who did this to him? She shook her head. I do not know all the names. Your father only told me that it went high up, that there were people in the Pentagon involved, people in Congress. He said the corruption was too deep to fight. I sat back in my chair, my mind reeling. For 30 years, I had mourned a man who was not dead. I had built my life around his memory, joined the Navy to honor him, worked hard to make him proud. And all that time, he was out there somewhere, alive and alone. I need to find him, I said. My mother reached across the table and took my hand. Sarah, please. If you start looking, you might put him in danger. You might put yourself in danger. I do not care, I said. He is my father. I deserve to know him. She squeezed my hand, tears streaming down her face. I know. But please be careful. When I returned to Norfolk, I could not stop thinking about the document I had found. I went back to the basement office and requested access to more files from the same time period. My supervisor approved the request without asking questions. After all, digitizing old records was my job. I spent weeks going through boxes of files, looking for any mention of my father, any clue about what had happened to him. Most of what I found was routine paperwork, but occasionally I would discover something interesting. A memo about an investigation into defense contractors. A report about faulty equipment. A list of officers who had been transferred to classified assignments. And then I found the second document. It was buried in a file labeled, Personnel Actions, Confidential. The document was a transfer order, dated May 1992, reassigning Commander James Mitchell to a position listed only as Special Assignment, Location Classified. The order was signed by a Rear Admiral whose name I did not recognize, William Carver. I wrote the name down and did some research. Rear Admiral William Carver had retired from the Navy in 2005. He was now living in Maryland, working as a consultant for defense contractors. The same contractors my father had been investigating. I knew I was getting close to something dangerous. But I could not stop. I had to know the truth. I decided to contact Rear Admiral Carver. I found his office number online and called, expecting to reach a secretary or an assistant. Instead, he answered the phone himself. "This is Carver," he said, his voice rough and tired. "Admiral Carver, my name is Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell. I am calling about a personnel matter from 1992. There was a long pause. "What kind of personnel matter?" "It concerns my father, Commander James Mitchell. I found a transfer order with your signature on it." Another pause, even longer. "Lieutenant, I do not know what you think you have found, but I suggest you stop looking. For your own good." "Is my father alive?" I asked. "I cannot discuss classified personnel matters," he said. "If you continue this line of inquiry, you will be violating security protocols. Do you understand?" "I understand that my father was declared dead in 1991, but I have documents proving he was alive in 1992. I want to know what happened to him." Carver's voice became cold. "Drop this, Lieutenant. You are playing with fire. There are things you do not understand, things that are bigger than you or your father. If you keep digging, you will regret it." He hung up. I sat at my desk, staring at the phone. His words had been a clear threat, but they had also confirmed what I already suspected. My father had been involved in something dangerous, something that powerful people wanted to keep hidden. And they were still out there, still protecting their secrets. I knew I should stop. I knew I should follow orders, do my job, and forget about the documents I had found. But I could not. My father had risked everything to expose the truth, and now it was my turn. I decided to contact someone I trusted, someone who might be able to help. Captain Lisa Rodriguez was a senior officer in the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. I had met her during a training exercise 2 years earlier, and we had stayed in touch. She was smart, tough, and had a reputation for integrity. I called her and asked if we could meet in person. She agreed, and we met at a coffee shop near the base, away from prying eyes and listening ears. I told her everything. About the documents I had found, about my mother's confession, about the phone call with Rear Admiral Carver. She listened carefully, taking notes, asking questions. When I finished, she sat back and looked at me with serious eyes. "Sarah, this is bigger than you realize. If what you are saying is true, we are talking about corruption at the highest levels of the military and government. People have been killed for less." "I know," I said. "But I need to find my father. I need to know he is safe." She nodded slowly. "Give me a few days. I will make some inquiries, see what I can find. But you need to be careful. Do not talk to anyone else about this, do not access any more classified files, and do not go looking on your own. Understood?" "Understood," I said. 3 days later, Captain Rodriguez called me. "We need to talk. Meet me at the same place in 1 hour." When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table with a folder in front of her. She looked worried. "I found something," she said quietly. "But you are not going to like it." She opened the folder and showed me a photograph. It was an old surveillance photo, grainy and faded, showing a man walking on a beach. The man had gray hair and a beard, and he was wearing casual clothes. But even with the aging and the disguise, I recognized him. It was my father. "Where was this taken?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Mexico," she said. "A small coastal town called Puerto Escondido." The photo is about 5 years old, taken by a private investigator who was hired by someone to track down former intelligence officers. "Is he still there?" "I do not know," she said. "But I have an address. A house near the beach where he was living at the time. It might be a dead end, but it is the only lead we have." She handed me a piece of paper with an address written on it. "Sarah, if you go looking for him, you need to understand the risk. The people who made him disappear are still out there, and they will not be happy if you find him. You could lose your career. You could lose your life." I looked at the address, then at the photograph of my father. After 30 years of believing he was dead, I finally had a chance to see him again. I could not walk away. "I have to go," I said. Captain Rodriguez nodded. "I thought you would say that. Be careful, Sarah. And when you find him, tell him there are still people in the Navy who believe in doing the right thing." 2 weeks later, I was on a plane to Mexico. I had taken leave from work, telling my supervisor I needed time to deal with a family matter. It was not a lie. Puerto Escondido was a small town on the Pacific coast, beautiful and quiet, the kind of place where people went to disappear. I rented a car and drove to the address Captain Rodriguez had given me. It was a modest house on a hill overlooking the ocean, painted white with blue shutters, surrounded by palm trees and tropical flowers. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at the house, trying to gather the courage to knock on the door. What would I say to him? What would he say to me? Would he even recognize me? I was 5 years old the last time he saw me. Now I was 35, a grown woman, a naval officer. Finally, I got out of the car and walked to the front door. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I knocked 3 times and waited. The door opened slowly, and a man appeared. He was older than in the photograph, his hair completely gray, his face lined with wrinkles. But his eyes were the same. Those were my father's eyes. We stood there, staring at each other. He looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. "Sarah," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Hi, Dad," I said, tears streaming down my face. He pulled me into his arms and held me tightly, and we both cried. 30 years of pain and longing and loss poured out of us, and for a moment, nothing else in the world mattered. Finally, he pulled back and looked at me, his hands on my shoulders. "How did you find me?" "It is a long story," I said. "Can I come in?" We sat on his porch, looking out at the ocean, and I told him everything. About finding his signature in the old records, about my mother's confession, about Captain Rodriguez and the investigation. He listened quietly, his expression a mixture of pride and fear. "You should not have come," he said when I finished. "It is not safe." "I had to," I said. "I needed to know you were alive. I needed to see you." He shook his head. "Sarah, the people who did this to me are still out there. If they find out you are here, they will come after you." "I do not care," I said. "I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of living with lies. You tried to expose the truth 30 years ago, and they made you disappear. But things are different now. There are people in the Navy who want to help, people who believe in doing the right thing." He looked at me for a long time. "You joined the Navy." "I wanted to make you proud," I said. "I have always been proud of you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Every day I have been gone, I have thought about you and your mother. I wanted to come home so many times, but I knew it would put you in danger. So I stayed away." "Tell me what happened," I said. "Tell me everything." He took a deep breath and began to talk. He told me about the investigation he had been conducting, about the defense contractors who were selling faulty equipment to the military, about the millions of dollars in illegal profits. He told me about the officers and politicians who were involved, about the threats he had received when he tried to expose them. "They gave me a choice," he said. "Disappear or die. They told me they would stage an accident, make it look like I died in the line of duty. My family would be taken care of, they said. I would be remembered as a hero. All I had to do was stay silent and go away." "And you agreed," I said. "I had no choice," he said. "If I refused, they would have killed me anyway, and then they would have gone after your mother. Maybe even you. I could not let that happen. So I became someone else. I moved around for years, never staying in one place too long, always looking over my shoulder. Eventually, I ended up here. Do you ever regret it?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Every day. I regret missing your childhood, missing your graduations, missing your life. But I do not regret trying to do the right thing. Those soldiers who died because of faulty equipment, they deserved better. I could not just let it go." We sat in silence, watching the waves crash against the shore. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "What happens now?" I asked. "I do not know," he said. "But I know I cannot run anymore. I am tired, Sarah. I have been hiding for 30 years, and I am tired." "Then maybe it is time to stop hiding," I said. "Maybe it is time to tell the truth." He looked at me, his eyes filled with hope and fear. "It will not be easy. The people responsible are powerful, and they will fight back." "I know," I said. "But I am not afraid. And I am not alone. There are people who will help us." He smiled, and for the first time since I had arrived, I saw the man my mother had fallen in love with, the brave officer who had risked everything for the truth. "You really are my daughter," he said. Over the next few days, my father and I talked for hours. He gave me copies of documents he had kept hidden all these years, evidence of the corruption he had tried to expose. Bank records showing illegal payments, contracts with forged signatures, internal memos discussing how to cover up the faulty equipment. It was all there, preserved and waiting for someone to bring it to light. When I returned to the United States, I contacted Captain Rodriguez again. I gave her the documents my father had provided, and she began building a case. It took months of careful investigation, of quietly gathering evidence and interviewing witnesses. Some people were afraid to talk. Others had died or disappeared over the years. But slowly, piece by piece, the truth began to emerge. Finally, Captain Rodriguez took the case to the Inspector General of the Navy. A formal investigation was opened, and subpoenas were issued. The media began to report on the story, and suddenly the secret my father had kept for 30 years was front-page news. Some of the people involved were already dead. Others had retired and were living comfortable lives, far from the consequences of their actions. But a few were still in positions of power, still making decisions that affected soldiers and sailors. Those people were forced to resign. Some faced criminal charges. Rear Admiral William Carver was one of them. When investigators searched his home, they found evidence of payments from defense contractors, proof that he had been on their payroll for decades. He was arrested and charged with corruption, fraud, and conspiracy. At his trial, he tried to claim he was just following orders, that he had done what he thought was necessary to protect national security. But the jury did not believe him. He was convicted and sentenced to 15 years in prison. Throughout the investigation and the trials, my father remained in Mexico. The Navy offered him protection if he would return and testify, but he refused. He said he had spent 30 years as a ghost, and he was not ready to come back into the world. He gave his testimony by video link, his face carefully obscured, his voice altered. But his words were clear and strong. My mother flew down to see him, the first time they had been together in 3 decades. I went with her, and we spent a week in that little house by the ocean, the 3 of us together again after so many years. It was not perfect. Too much time had passed, too many wounds had been opened. But it was a beginning. 6 months after the investigation concluded, the Navy held a ceremony at the Memorial Garden in San Diego. They removed my father's name from the Wall of the Fallen and issued a formal apology for what had been done to him. They offered to restore his rank and his pension, to give back what had been taken from him. He declined. He said he did not want their money or their recognition. He just wanted the truth to be known. But he did accept one thing. The Navy issued a commendation for courage and integrity, recognizing his efforts to expose corruption even at great personal cost. The commendation was presented to me at the ceremony, and I accepted it on his behalf. As I stood there in my dress uniform, holding the framed certificate, I thought about all the years my father had been gone, all the pain and loneliness my mother and I had endured. I thought about the lies that had been told, the secrets that had been kept, the good men and women who had died because of greed and corruption. But I also thought about the truth that had finally been revealed, about the justice that had been served, however imperfect. I thought about my father, living quietly in Mexico, finally free from the fear that had haunted him for so long. And I thought about myself, a naval officer following in his footsteps, carrying on his legacy of integrity and courage. After the ceremony, I called him. He answered on the second ring, and I could hear the ocean in the background. "It is done," I said. "The ceremony is over. Your name has been cleared." "How do you feel?" he asked. "Proud," I said. "Proud of you. Proud of what we did together." "I am proud of you too, Sarah," he said. "You finished what I started. You were braver than I ever was." "I learned from the best," I said. We talked for a while longer, about small things, about everyday life. My mother was planning to visit him again next month. I would try to come too, if I could get leave. We were building something new, something fragile but real. It would take time, but we had time now. When I hung up the phone, I stood in the Memorial Garden for a while, looking at the names carved into the marble. So many people who had given their lives in service to their country. My father's name was no longer among them, but his sacrifice had been just as real, his courage just as great. I touched the marble wall, feeling the cool stone under my fingers, and made a promise. I would continue to serve with honor, to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult, to never let fear or corruption win. I would be the officer my father had taught me to be, not through words but through his example. As I walked away from the memorial garden, the sun was setting over the Pacific. The sky was painted in brilliant colors, and a warm breeze carried the smell of salt water. Somewhere across that ocean, my father was watching the same sunset, and I knew he was thinking of me. I got in my car and drove back to the base, back to my duties and responsibilities. There was work to be done, a navy to serve, a legacy to uphold. But for the first time in my life, I felt complete. I knew who I was and where I came from. I knew the truth. And the truth had set me free.